Hey, welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Cellarcast, episode 72? Yeah, 72. Okay. I have to double check. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I've spent like the whole day thinking about what the hell I'm going to talk about because, the last episode I did not record that many days ago, like 4 or 5 days ago at this point. Probably less. And so I feel like the regular amount of time for me to, like, that passes for me to, like, build up, like, a week's worth of stuff to talk about has not happened. Seems like there's no real news that I'm really interested in that I can find, that I can think of, in terms of games or current events. So someone's moving outside. So expect this to be a highly rambly episode. I guess I've had this in my back pocket for a while. And it's something that I want, because we didn't have any questions from last time either. So I'm just let's just jump straight into it. I've had this like rant in my back pocket for a while, and I've never had an excuse or a reason to deliver it, or more so maybe just that I keep forgetting about it. But it's just one of those things I have on standby, and it's a topic I feel very strongly about, and that is Metroidvanias. Not the genre, like whether or not I like it or not, but the term Metroidvania, the term for like the genre or subgenre, whichever you want to label it as. The term Metroidvania is terrible. It's a bad term. And I'm going to explain why. Actually, I wrote an entire article about this like 2 years ago on my website when I was still doing that, about why Metroidvania is a bad term. And I don't have to read off of it because I know it so well. So, okay. Do I even need to explain? I'll give like, for the sake of setting everything up of my argument, we'll get a little history lesson. So, let's unpack the term Metroidvania. The first half of it is Metroid. So Metroid obviously is the series of, I don't know, like search, exploration, adventure type games. I guess that's how you would describe it. It's games where you are dropped onto, you get dropped into a world, and there are so many paths available to you, and most of the paths lead to dead ends, except for the one path that gives you the one thing you need to unlock the next thing. And then the next thing leads to two more paths, or one of the previous paths. The next thing leads to two more paths, and one of them is blocked off. But you find a thing in the other one that lets you go down like the first door you saw or something like that. It's that kind of a design, right? I feel like everyone knows what Metroid is, right? But that is the basic premise. And to be honest, there weren't too many games that were quite like it. There's a couple, like Clash at Demon Head for NES kind of vaguely steers into that direction, but it's not exact. And then, okay, so Castlevania. Castlevania is the other half of Metroidvania. So Castlevania, the first, 5, 6 games, probably more, were all just very straightforward 2D action platformers. That's it, just linear, level-to-level action platformers. Then, all of a sudden, in 1997, pretty sure it was 97, Symphony of the Night comes out. Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And Symphony of the Night is a dramatic departure from anything previously in the series. Symphony of the Night basically... Okay, fuck it. Microphone came unplugged. Symphony of the Night basically adopted a completely different structure from the previous Castlevania games. So instead of just being a level-to-level linear affair, Symphony of the Night had a much more open environment. Essentially, you're in Dracula's castle, and then your goal is to kill Dracula. How do you get to Dracula? Well, you got to explore the castle. So, for instance, it has this a style that is very similar to Metroid, where you'll be presented at the start with, let's just say, 3 doors, A, B, and C. Doors A and B are dead ends. Door C leads to something that gets you an item, and then you go back to door B and you can open it, or you can get past whatever the roadblock was there, and then you so on and so forth. Very Metroid-like structure, essentially. And people didn't really know what to call it because there was a lot of things going on in that game that hadn't really been... the individual elements were nothing new, but the fact that they had been combined in that specific way was new. And it felt like something that could be replicated. You know, like, oh, this could be a little... this needs like a new term to describe it. So people looked at the new structure that it added, or that it implemented, the Metroid-like structure, and they called it, oh, well, it's not like a Castlevania game, it's like a Metroidvania game. And that description seems like it suffices, but it doesn't. If you actually if you've actually played a Metroid game and then played Symphony of the Night, it really doesn't. The reason for that is pretty simple. It's because it's incomplete. The term Metroidvania does not accurately describe the games that fall under the genre, or the subgenre. It's not a fitting label. And so in my mind, that makes it not useful and not a good term. So what do I mean by it doesn't accurately describe? Okay. So, yeah, you got Castlevania with a Metroid kind of structure of progression. Sort of. There is one huge element that is missing from the label Metroidvania that it does not, that is very crucial to a game like Symphony of the Night and games, other games in the genre. And that is the RPG element. So this might take a little bit of explaining. This is like another, I got to explain some stuff, because a lot of people are surprisingly, well, not really surprisingly, because it's a very weird term. The actual meaning of what an RPG element is kind of vague for most people, but it has a very specific meaning that you can apply to a ton of things, or that you can see in a bunch of things. I mean, so okay, it's a confusing term on its face, because RPG stands for role-playing game. So a role-playing game element would be, oh, isn't that just anything that lets you role play as a different kind of character, or a fictional character? No. No. That then pretty much every game would fall under role-playing game, but they don't. And the reason for that is because RPG does not actually refer to role-playing, which might sound weird. RPG originates from probably other games before this, but mainly Dungeons and Dragons. You could probably find some other game that fits, that did this earliest, but really we're going to just talk about Dungeons and Dragons, because that game is ridiculously influential on a ton of game design. So, Dungeons and Dragons was essentially concocted as, how would you tell your own fantasy story just using your imagination and pen and paper and a set of dice or something. So how do you create a super extensive fantasy world that you can interact with and play a character in, without it just being like, and provide specifically, like, yeah, anyone can do that. Like, you can just role play. But if you want to make a game out of that, if you want a role playing game, that has new requirements, because games need to have rules. There has to be an objective. You want to say, okay, I don't just want to necessarily role play. I want this to also have some kind of element that I can succeed or fail at or make decisions in, and have that have some kind of weight, because games provide something like a failure state, like a game over or a loss or a death. And that means that things have serious consequences, let's say. And that is exciting. That's exciting in the same way, like, is soccer very interesting if there's no score? Like, not really. It's pretty much just a scrimmage. I want some stakes to my fantasy role playing, so I'm gonna make it a game. So how do you apply rules to a thing where a game where it's just writing down stuff on paper and like rolling die and stuff like that? You do it by grounding elements of the world into quantifiable values. So here's what I mean by that. In short, it's numbers. It's numbers. So, let's imagine that I am a dungeon master, and my players are going through a dungeon, and they come to a chest. And there is a risk that this chest could be a mimic, right? That it could be a trap in some way, and that opening it is a bad idea. Or it could have something valuable inside of it. So one of the players has the courage, let's say, to open the chest. Or even better yet, let's say the chest itself is not trapped, but there's like a tripwire or something. And my player has a high enough perception stat, which, oh God, I'm getting into fucking mic unplugged again, bitch. The player is able to correctly identify that there is a trap, and they're able to disarm it. So now I say, oh, very good. I want to reward you for catching my little trap. So I'm going to give you a sword that is stronger than the sword you currently have. That's how you want to reward. You want to make them more powerful in some way. You could reward them with like gold or something, but like, you want to do it with a sword. You want to give them a stronger sword or weapon or something. Let's keep it simple. How is this sword, let's say they have the silver sword, I'm giving them the gold sword. How is the gold sword better than the silver sword? Well, there's a number of ways that you could go about doing that. But a very clear, obvious way is to make the gold sword literally do more damage. So instead of having like 5 attack, it has 10 attack or something like that. And this applies all over. How much, like, you're in combat with an enemy. Well, how do I know? I mean, in real life, killing something is a little more complicated than just getting like either HP value down to 0. So like, okay, how do my players know exactly when they've killed a monster or something? Oh, it literally has a health value or endurance or something like that, and they lower it by attacking it to 0. So RPG elements are basically a way to take abstract concepts like health or damage dealt or something like that, or stats like perception, endurance, charisma, completely abstract ideas, and turn them into quantifiable values, numerical values, taking these ideas and turning them into real numbers. And in that way, there's a couple. So in that way, it grounds elements of the role playing enough that you can actually interact with them in a way that has like stakes, in a way that there's rules, because you know, if your character takes a hit and the whether or not you die is completely at the whim of you die from that hit or you don't, that does not create that does not really create an interesting game. One of the other things that RPG elements, this is why they're called RPG elements, because this is what grounds the role playing, does, is that it makes players accountable for certain things, like your character's stats, something like that, you know? It allows the player, typically, to interact with these values, right? Like, when you come across a stat check in an RPG where it says, you need this much, this high of a speech stat, excuse me, to like get this specific dialogue option that's going to resolve the situation immediately. Well, that's the designer saying you were accountable for getting your speech stat that high. An alternative, doing this without RPG elements, would be some kind of like a dialogue tree where you would have to pick, there's no stats involved. You're literally just picking the options that are going to resolve the conflict, right? As opposed to, here is the stat-gated dialogue choice that's going to do that for you. It's going to give you the best outcome. Okay? So, all of this to say is that I need to establish what an RPG element is. And once you start noticing it, you'll see it everywhere, And and really notice what has an RPG element, right? Experience. That's freaking everywhere. You know why? Because experience is a completely abstract concept. Like, yeah, we have a rough idea of it, but being able to quantify it into a hard number is useful for the purposes of a game. It does a lot of things like, giving the player an idea of how much left they have to go before they hit, another level. Which creates this the progression system. Like you get a progression system which has all these other effects on the game. RPG elements are very useful, which is why you see them everywhere. One of I think the biggest thing that Symphony of the Night did, that it added to the Metroid formula, was RPG elements. If you play, let's say, Super Metroid, and then you play Symphony of the Night, those are not similar games. They have similar structures, but the inclusion of RPG elements is completely changes the dynamics and the progression of Symphony of the Night. I guess as a side note, I should say, so for instance, there's like a thing about like, is having like, hearts in Zelda, is that like an RPG element? Sort of. Kind of. It's like a weird half pseudo step, in my opinion, at least. There's probably arguments back and forth that you could have about it, but it's like, yeah, it is quantifying a pretty abstract idea into like a symbol or like a meter, but I get, maybe you could say like a soft RPG element as opposed to a hard one. Like if it was just a number, right? In like a classic 2D Mario game, when you can only take one hit until you get the mushroom or a power-up, and then you can take 2 hits. So that is not an RPG element, because Mario literally, there is no numerical tie-in to that, essentially. There's or numerical expression of that idea. It's just kind of, I don't know if there's really a term for it. But it's not an RPG element. If, for instance, Mario like stayed the exact same, but then you got a mushroom and you had a little health point thing that said instead of 1 health points you have 2, that would be an RPG element. I I guess if and even if he did change and you had that kind of a system, it still wouldn't really matter. I defined it in really clear terms in that article. Can I? I gotta hang on. Yeah, let me go to my website. I really like the way that I described it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh man, this is an old article. Okay. Oh, God, this is long. Where is it? Okay. An RPG, this is what I wrote back in 2020. An RPG is a game where the logic of the player-facing system relies on representing real-world concepts as abstract values. Wait, that's not... I fucking wrote that wrong. Or did I say it wrong? It's kind of the same thing. Sort of the same thing. And that kind of applies to both. It's turning things into numbers. So let's go into... What did I write after that? A Fallout is an RPG. You make a character and role-play as them through a large open world making constant story decisions. But 1987's Final Fantasy is also an RPG. Even though character creation is about as deep as naming your party, the game is generally linear, and you aren't faced with choices that will impact the narrative. I mean, I guess character creation. Yeah, character creation, I said, not customization. However, in both games, when you pick up a new weapon, that weapon does not kill monsters faster because, quote, it's the gold sword compared to your copper sword. It does so because your copper sword is 5 attack and the gold sword is 10. That's what I wrote back in 2020. To give a more focused example, take Super Mario Bros. When Mario is small, he can only take one hit, but after collecting a mushroom, he grows and can take a second hit. Of course, there might be a series of numerical values behind the health system, but that's not the player-facing logic. So even here, I pointed out, it's important that, like, obviously every game has numbers going on under the hood, but not every game makes those apparent to you. If Mario were an RPG, not talking about the actual Mario RPG, it would be presented as such. Mario has 1 hit point. Collecting/using a mushroom gives him a second hit point. Now you're working with abstract values. You could remove the visual of Mario changing size and it would make as much sense to the player. This, I believe... Oh yeah, I'm just going to quote myself because I'm so good. This, I believe, more than anything else, is what separates Symphony of the Night from Super Metroid. The RPG elements completely change the progression of the game by shifting the focus from player growth to avatar growth, or the shift from mastering mechanics to overcome the obstacle versus increasing your character's abstract level until you're beefy enough to overcome the obstacle. I guess I should mention that, like, here's another distinction between those two games, is that in Metroid, generally you do not get, like, you rarely, besides kind of the suit upgrades, but even then it's only like part of the upgrade. In Metroid, most of the weapons or upgrades you get have dual purposes, as in the tool, for instance, you get the ice beam, and yeah, the ice beam can be used for combat. The ice beam can also be used to freeze enemies and jump on them for platforming sections. There's, famously, like, what is it, the entrance to Norfair or something like that, or getting out of Norfair, is something like that you can only do if you can freeze enemies so that you can use them as platforms. And it's like Super Metroid. You get the missiles. Obviously, the missiles are a weapon, but this is even more blunt example. The missiles open doors. There are doors that only missiles can open. Let's go back to my article. My first few hours in Symphony were spent pitifully weak, using dinky swords with short reach. I was struggling to get a hang of the movement and accustoming myself to the many dances you need to learn to fight enemies appropriately. Suffice to say, it was challenging and a bit of a slog, but I knew from that introductory segment, which everyone probably knows about, that at some point I was going to get all of my stuff back and be that overpowered badass once again. Then, at some point, around the 4-hour mark, the game just plateaued. Something you must face as a designer when implementing an RPG progression system is that the sooner the player is given the chance to grind their character without much risk, they can and will do so until they're at least a little too strong. This window of opportunity is where the game's difficulty curve risks flattening. Once I reached a high enough level and acquired a good weapon, Symphony of the Night's difficulty became almost trivial, checking items off of a list and blowing through every enemy the game threw at me with a few strikes. And I'll admit, it does feel good to meet the green armor guy for the first time, barely eking out a victory as he shaves off 2/3 of your health, only to return to the same area and dispatch him in 4 hits. This is a double-edged sword, however, because the instant you drop into a new area and you're faced with enemies who are around your level, the spike in difficulty can be downright frustrating. Spending 5 hours breezing through the game only to be stopped dead in my tracks pissed me off more than it excited me, because the pacing suffered a dramatic gear change. By contrast, because Super Metroid doesn't use RPG progression, the difficulty can be tuned with a fair amount of precision by paying mind to what items and weapons the player needs to reach certain areas, and then designing enemies and environments to challenge them at that level. I don't want to imply that Metroid is some hardcore skill-based game and Symphony of the Night is just arbitrarily difficult. I'm just trying to illustrate the profound impact that RPG elements have on a game's design. It has to be approached in almost a completely different way. They take a lot of control from the designer's hands and put it into the players. Remember what I said about accountability? Which can be exciting, but hazardous. If the developer wants to maintain a certain difficulty, they have to pay close attention to what opportunities they're giving the player. This is why most people don't play RPGs for challenge as much as they do the other strengths of the genre. Story, characters, ideas. Really, these are many strengths of Symphony of the Night. Its ambience, music, art direction, the intricate world and multitude of dynamic enemies, the sheer size and scope of exploration, and the experimentation that the equipment system offers. Okay. I sort of go off talking about my thoughts on Symphony of the Night and how it. Basically, I just felt like, should I talk about it? I don't know. I'll skip over that. You can go read it for yourself. Basically, just like why I think the RPG element, it's designed in a completely different way, basically. Because the player is given so much freedom, because the progression system is really just, hey, do you want to stand in front of a respawning enemy for 20 hours and just grind them until you're like max level? That's a possibility. It is a thing you can do. Most people aren't going to do it, but it's something you can do. And the fact that that even exists makes the game essentially ultimately more of a playground when I was really thinking about it. And I finally, okay, I'm going to get to, let's see, my kind of part of my thesis. When I say that Metroidvania as a term is undescriptive, I mean that it's shallow. Super Metroid is a tight, focused experience with wonderful level design, and comparing it to Symphony of the Night is almost a logical folly. The latter is a wide-open playground to mess around in. Yeah, I remember that word choice. Encouraging your creativity with its own range of mechanics, its hundreds of items and foes. The beauty of Symphony of the Night is how free and lackadaisical it is with its core design decisions, that liberty. What at the time seemed to me like sloppy implementation of another game's ideas was just a closed-minded view of what it was actually trying to accomplish, what the quote-unquote Metroidvanias that follow it are trying to accomplish. I guess I talked about this much earlier in that article. So my problem with the term Metroidvania and why I think it's undescriptive beyond what I literally just said is that as a term, it is like, okay, so let's actually like really break it down. Metroidvania. It is describing, this was a term that was used to categorize Symphony of the Night when it came out because there was nothing else like it. It is a term that describes the structure of a Metroid game with the aesthetics of Castlevania. Now, if you think about that for a second, that doesn't make any sense to apply to any game that is not a Castlevania game or has a similar gothic kind of aesthetic. Like, I don't know, like Axiom Verge. I don't know if that game technically, I haven't played it, but I don't know if it technically falls under Metroidvania. But like, that's not, people, there's probably people out there who would call it a Metroidvania, but that is not a gothic Castlevania game that has its own little sci-fi art style. The video game genres have a tough enough time as is because there's so many variables that I think categorizing something by the aesthetics of a different series that this game you're talking about might not necessarily fall into is a really unhelpful thing. And it's also a term that has like an extreme like cultural or historical context required for it. Like having to understand that it was first applied to Symphony of the Night and how Symphony of the Night was different from the previous Castlevania games, and how it was taking from this other, partially from this other game series, Metroid, is like, if you don't know that stuff, it's like such an impenetrable phrase. Like, what is that supposed to mean? So when I hear that term, unless it is literally, you know who gets to put that on their game? Castlevania games. And Bloodstained, the Iga spiritual successors. They get to put that on their game. But even then, I think it's very, like, it's still extremely undescriptive, because it totally, like, Metroid and the previous, the pre-Symphony of the Night Castlevania games, neither of those games have, like, really hard RPG elements. Not a lot of, like, you know, the numbers. So completely leaving that out is, like, I don't know what you... It's like, I even at the end of that article, like what would you even call this genre? Because, like, Metroidvania is so ingrained now that people just, it has no meaning, almost. It's just, it's when I say it has no meaning, I mean, like, people just say it, and you just sort of understand what it's supposed to mean. Even though a game with and without RPG elements and, like, that kind of progression system, completely different. Totally different kind of experience. I guess I would say, like, the term search action is kind of, like, memed on, but it's, like, not a terrible start. Something like, I don't know, exploration RPG? Something like that? Like, adventure RPG? I mean, that's not great either. Exploration RPG might, I don't know, man. Because it's like it's a very specific kind of, like, structure, right? Where you're meant to explore and come to dead ends and explore other paths and then get items that unlock other ways. But you also have these RPG elements in there. And, like, customization and finding different items and stuff like that. I don't know, like, treasure hunt RPGs. There's, like, a lot of it. Leave your suggestions in the comments. I'd be genuinely curious to what kind of alternative genre names you could give to that. Key hunting RPG. You know, something like that. Yeah, so I've had that rant built up just forever, waiting to unleash. And unfortunately, I don't have, like, a super hard, you know, definitive conclusion, other than I think it's a bad term, but it's probably too late to stop using it. I don't like using it. I try to avoid using it when possible because I think it's bad at describing what it's supposed to describe. I mean, then again, I'm the same guy who plays fighting games, and if you... Oh my god. I think I mentioned fighting games to my dad one time, who knows really nothing about video games besides what I've told him. And he mentioned his reply made it clear to me that he had like no idea what I was talking about, and I had to realize, oh, a fighting game is really unclear. It's a really non-descriptive term. Like, yeah, technically it is descriptive, but it's not really. Like, when you think of that's why there's a lot of genre breakdowns, like classic 2D fighter. That's sort of better, but yeah, there was a time when beat 'em ups and fighting games were interchangeable terms. So you could find like old magazine articles about like Final Fight or something, and they call it a fighting game. Or that you'll find like something for a KOF or a Street Fighter, and they call it a beat 'em up. Because it's like, well, it doesn't really. I mean, I guess actually, now if I had to pick, I would say that beat 'em up probably works better for that genre, just because like beat 'em up is like very. I feel like that has like a mood, like a tone to it that fits the genre much better than just calling it a flat like fighting game. Because in beat 'em ups, it is like, hey, just go beat 'em up. And you're just like, the part of the appeal is just punching down a bunch of like a big group of guys or something like that, and picking up a pipe or something. And yeah, you're beating them up. I don't know. It's very like carefree and like casual, which I feel like a lot of beat 'em ups kind of usually tend to fall into. They're a little more just like, hey, just a little bit more of like a honestly, there's probably like, I get that they're like, they can be really difficult, but the mechanics tend not to be super deep, if you get what I mean. Like, you can pick up a beat 'em up super easily, so like the name sounds casual enough to fit. That's it. If you have any thoughts about that, I'd be genuinely curious to know, because I think it's an interesting topic. The Metroidvania discussion. What the heck else did I want to talk about? I was recently reminded of the weirdest manga I've ever read. And when I say recently reminded, I mean like 20 minutes before the podcast started. I just kind of randomly remembered that it existed. And I don't really know why. Besides, it just kind of popped into my head. It's called. I read this way, way back in high school. It's called Anorexia Shikabane Hanako wa Kyoshokusho. So it's such a weird fucking. It's like this 9-chapter manga that I read online when I was in high school. And it's essentially it's weird. I don't even know I couldn't come up with something to compare it to, so I'll just briefly give a synopsis. So the idea is that the main character is this guy who gets a job at a meat factory, like a meat processing plant that's owned by this wealthy Japanese family. And he's being shown around the plant by the like middle daughter of the family. And then there's like some kind of hardware or some kind of like malfunction. There's like an explosion or something, and they're both caught in this big accident that happens at the factory. And they recover in the hospital together. And this is the weird part. That's like, a lot of things in this manga didn't make a lot of sense. Where, and mind you, this is all in like 9 chapters, so everything I'm about to say happens super fast. So, or like 10 chapters. There's like a chapter 0, so it's like a 10-chapter thing. So essentially, when he wakes up, or when he finishes recovering, his hand is stuck to the daughter's hand. Their hands are stuck together. as a result of the accident. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't, because it's not actually true. Basically, the daughter convinces him to keep up this lie that their hands are stuck together because she needs a witness from the outside world to help her escape from her family or fucking do something. I don't even know. A lot of this was kind of a blur. So I'm just gonna, if you honestly are curious about that, I'm just gonna go into full spoilers from what I remember of this manga, because I found it online again. I just glanced through it. You can go read it. It's not a very long read. It's fairly disturbing, so watch out for that. The anorexia is actually a very minor part of it. I'll get to that. So it, I guess, does, I don't know if it really has like a, yeah, it's not about that. It's not about anorexia, like the mental. Is anorexia considered a mental illness? Whatever. Yeah, it's anorexia shikabane hanako wa kyoshokusho. Just look it up. But I'm gonna go straight into spoilers. Okay, so they eat people. The family eats people. They're cannibals. More specifically, basically what happened was that, so there's like, there's like the eldest daughter, eldest son, second daughter, third daughter, and then there's a second son who's like the youngest. And it's like roughly in that order, if I remember, of age. So there's like 5 of these kids. The oldest ones are like young adults. They're like in their 20s. I think the oldest son is like a doctor. And essentially their family owned this meat company. And their parents died. And when they died, they left them a letter that said that their entire lives they'd actually been, instead of like what they thought they were actually eating human meat for dinner. And for some reason, they just like go along with it. They're just like, oh, we have to keep eating meat, human meat now. Like the eldest sister's like a fucking monster. She's like a literal like wild beast. Like she's fucking like an act. She's not like barely a human being. Like it destroyed her mind, this revelation. So like the main character doesn't really know what the fuck's going on. There's a bunch of like really gratuitous fucking, there's a scene where they bathe together. And it's like, this doesn't really have to be here, but whatever. And then they got to go to dinner. And they wheel out like a little safe, and they open the safe, and it's like someone he knows. It's like there's just a girl in there, and she has like a ball gag on. And the youngest daughter is like cutting her clothes off because they're going to like skin her alive. And then the eldest daughter, the fucking main character's like, what the fuck is going on? What the fuck is happening? And then the eldest daughter just loses control and just fucking jumps on her and rips her throat out with her teeth. And I was like, oh, okay. All right then. So you get this reveal where essentially, oh my god, no, there's this fucking, because I'm looking at it again. There's this weird thing. Okay, so the main character has a twin sister, and the twin sister, they always looked really similar when they were kids. And so the twin sister, the sister's in like the hospital. She's like chronically ill or something, and she's at the same hospital that like the eldest brother works out of the family. So the main character and his twin sister, the The sister was like the parents put all the pressure on her to be the perfect child, and were completely one-sided, and they made her like that. She did like ballet and like piano and all of these things, and they were just like being super tiger parents towards her, and she felt a lot of resentment towards the main character because they didn't put any of that pressure on him. So what she did as a child was castrate her brother so that his voice wouldn't drop, and then forced him to pretend to be her. Ooh, my neck. Pretend to like force him to like take her place at like events and things, and to dress and look like a girl. She did it with scissors. She and I think that like this fucking something happened where, oh yeah, he was at like one of her rehearsals, and she was somewhere else, and she got hit by a car. She gets hit by a car, and they're like, what? I guess that's what was going. They figure out what was happening the whole time, and then she, what the fuck? I'm just scrolling through just to like see some stuff. Oh yeah, there's this whole weird shit where like the little boy is he like fucking like whips the oldest sister's ass while she's in like lingerie. This is a weird fucking manga. What the fuck even? I forget how things even escalate. Because again, it's not particularly long. It's 10 chapters. Oh, I should mention, the reason it's called anorexia is because the girl that his hand is supposed to be fused to was the only member of the family who did not accept the cannibalism. So she just doesn't eat anything because they will not let her eat anything besides people. So her diet is entirely like vitamin supplements. So she's like literally anorexic, and she's like egregiously underweight. And so, but in order to hide that, she wears these like super like flowy kind of big clothes. So yeah, I just like I forget. I'm just like randomly skimming through it because I still vaguely remember what happened in the story. All I remember is that at the end there's like the little girl has like a shotgun. Yeah, these chapters are fairly long. Would I recommend it? I have no idea. It's probably bad and stupid and way too edgy for no point. But it was interesting. You know, it's not every day that like it's not every day you come across a story that just has this much weird, strange stuff. And I think it's like I think it was trying to be deep, or like it was trying to say something. There's like some attempts at like, oh, you know, but you eat animals kind of thing, or it's fucking, yeah, anorexia, strange manga. Yeah, literally nothing else. I just wanted to talk about it because I don't remember this. Oh, did someone get shot up? God damn, I'm just like randomly skimming through this. A lot of like blood and fucking BDSM shit. At some point. That's it. That's all I have to say. I don't know what else I'm gonna... We're at 50 minutes. Come on, I gotta put in something stronger than that. Oh, hey, here's a funny headline I just saw randomly looking at r/games. Square Enix announces financial results decline, but FF14's strong performance continues. The least surprising headline I've ever seen. Yeah, so that was literally today as I'm recording this. Financial results of the first half of the fiscal year came out today. Digital entertainment business, which includes video games, saw a drop in net sales by 9.5% year on year, while operating income decreased by 16.6% year on year. That's not surprising, because I was literally talking with a friend like yesterday about the absolutely infuriating way that Square Enix operates, where it's like it's proof that at some level the free market does not work. Because I think I've been over this before, but to reiterate, essentially, Square Enix loves having a live service game. They want it. They want one. And they keep making these shitty. Like, when I saw that Avengers game, I was like, this game feels like at some point early in its development, someone came in and said, make it a live service game. Make it like Destiny. And like, there's so many of these that they've done. They did the Babylon's Fall one. They did some other shit that I'm forgetting, because they're all extremely forgettable as well. They attempt to launch like one a year, and they all fail. And Final Fantasy XIV pays for it. And in the most ironic twist, FF14 is a game it's a live service game. It's an MMO, and it contains none of the like predatory or toxic monetization methods that they try to stuff into their other games. Like 14 makes as much money as it does because it's good. Because the game is really good and it like respects your time and is intentionally designed, like 14 is intentionally designed in a way so that you do not under any circumstances have to grind, like at all. Like, of course you can put that on yourself, but it does not have any systems that require you to grind or even really incentivize you to do so. It's extremely friendly towards its player base. The only like exception on the monetization is that there is like a real money store, but that was like it's not accessible anywhere from in game. Like once you open the game, it doesn't ask you for a single cent. I guess you could maybe argue that like if you're playing on the free trial and you eventually get to like a point, the end of the trial, which is content gated, not time gated. It's the the base game and the first expansion, which is a fuck ton of content. Once you get that far, and it will say like, you know, or there are like limits, like you can't use the regular chat. You can use chat if you're in like a party for a dungeon, but there's like little limits, which I guess that is sort of saying, hey, you know, you can buy the full game, or you would need like a subscription. You can't be a free player. But like, okay, yeah, whatever. That's of course. Once you boot up the game, it does not ask you for any more money. Like if you're a paying subscriber, if you bought the game and you pay a subscription, you start it up, it's like, cool, you're in the world. Sick. Asks nothing of you. And that was intentional. Like when I remember when I played Knights of the Old Republic. No, sorry, just the Old Republic. Just the MMO. I was like, oh man, I felt like there were so many points in that game. I think I mentioned this back when I talked about it on the podcast. There were so many points in that game where even with my relatively, like, I go on Steam, so I think I can check the Old Republic. 5 hours. So in a 5 hour span of playtime, that I was like, man, this game, this is taking so many opportunities, practically every single one it can, to remind me that I'm playing a video game. And that's like in a bad way. Where like you're just constantly getting shoved this like, you can only have one hotbar if you're a free player. You can only you can't go in this area in the starting zone on like the starting planet. Can't go there if you're a free player. Can't do this if you're a free player. And that was like very, it wasn't like annoying, it wasn't like an active thing, but it was just, it felt like an overall reduction on the experience, if that makes sense. Like you're just reminding me that I'm not playing the full version of the game. Like I feel like I'm constantly just getting dragged out of it. That's what it was, like dragged out of the experience. So like Square does this thing where they just launch all these shitty projects, these shitty live service games, and FF14 foots the bill for it. And when I say that like the free market doesn't like has a limit, I mean it in this sense, because this is not like a recent thing. This is multiple times this has happened. And I feel like if you're all into the free market, you're like, well, then you should just support the game that has the good monetization model and all that. And just buy Final Fantasy 14. It's one of the most consumer-friendly games on the market, and Square Enix makes it. Surely that would send them the message. No, it doesn't. It does not at all. Because an executive can just say, oh, fuck it. Yeah, so it's like, so like when you look at the financial reports from Square, you're like, wow, 14 makes like the most money for them. It makes them a lot of money. And then you listen to the 14 devs, and like there's things in the game that have, the game is like pretty high quality all around, but there's like like specifically PvP, for instance. PvP is like the one thing that any 14 player will tell you needs a lot of work. It's never really been that good. And the team has even said, yeah, we know PvP needs like a full rework from the ground up, basically. But we don't have the people to do it. You know, we don't have the staff. We would have to take, they had like a few changes to PvP, and they were like, yeah, we had to take people off of like community moderators positions for that. We had to like shift people away to like go develop that or something like that. And you're like, or like, hey, yeah, we don't, when the game was literally like filling up, when the servers were crashing because so many people were playing it, they said, yeah, like we just can't get servers, or like we want, or like they wanted to expand servers, but that shit's expensive. And you're like, oh man, it really sounds like they're strapped for cash and developers some of the time. And then you look at their earnings report, you're like, what the fuck? No, why are they saying that? Doesn't make any sense. It doesn't line up. They make the most money. What? You know, I get that MMOs take a lot of people, but like, you're making a fuck ton of money. You're making really, really good profits. Where's all that money oh. Like half of the money that the game makes goes into these shitty projects. So it's like these executives, they see the success of 14. And instead of like they see the success of 14, and they see the failure of all of these other projects. Babylon's Fall or some shit. Oh my god. Am I gonna? No, I'm gonna save the NT rant for after this. I'm gonna fucking. I'm literally gonna write that down. I'm gonna write down to fucking talk about Dissidia NT. I'm gonna put like 10 exclamation marks behind it. Okay. So they see the success of 14 and the failure of all these other projects. And instead of like analyzing why this thing is successful and why this thing is not successful, they just completely flap it off and just say, I'm assuming in their minds it's just like, I am assuming what it is that they have such little understanding of their own product and like their audience, the actual consumer base, that they think it's just like fucking random or something. I don't even know. I genuinely don't think that the executives at Square understand why 14 is so successful. I don't think they know. They probably just see it as like, oh, I guess that one worked out. What if we had another one? And they paid no attention to why it worked. Like, all of these things that are like really good and solid about the game, like how good the story is, how much care is put into it from the dev team, how like it's really open to like, it has these systems that like just are just designed around having fun, and these areas that are just designed around having fun, and like, yeah, fuck it, you can play whatever class you want. Like, they level individually, but like you can play whatever you want. And all of these just very feel good things about the game completely ignore that. I don't think they understand games enough to understand any of these things. And then they just pump money into another project hoping that it'll have the same result, but complete with no knowledge of why the thing was a success in the first place. And like, it's so the ultimate irony. So what I'm saying is, like, instead of like to go back to my free market thing, theoretically, you know, they would reinvest that money into 14. Oh, let's pump this thing up. Let's make it really good. And then maybe we'll take some of those profits. Obviously, this is our big money maker. Let's put enough. Let's, like, okay, what do you need? How many people do you want? Do you need more to, like, focus on this thing? Okay, we'll give you the money for that. Rest of the money will go towards funding other projects. Seems relatively normal. Instead, it's like, we're going to take fucking, like, half the money. And we're not going to reinvest it into the game. Lost my train of thought for a second. We're going to do the thing that consumers don't want. So, like, it's almost like, as a consumer, like, whenever you see one of these total disaster live service games that they try to put out, it's like, there's, like, I'll see a meme sometimes of, like, yeah, 14 paid for that. 14 paid for this, like, afterbirth of a game. And, like, you it's like you as a consumer are being punished for rewarding good games, which is like the most backwards thing, because you don't get more games that are just as good as 14. You give money to the thing that's good and you get something bad. And you're like, what the fuck? And it's just, I don't know. It's a miracle that there are people like Yoshi P who produce, you know, who lead up the development of games like that, and that there's other people who genuinely care. It comes down to just caring. Like, do you care? And I don't think most executives do, because they're just there to get paid. Like, that's like the ultimate irony of all of this is that, and this has been pointed out many times, but it bears repeating because it keeps happening, which is, if you were a finance person, a lot of times this stuff gets pinned on marketing. Things like microtransactions are not really marketing. That's finance. Okay, let's direct our ire where it deserves. It's like the finance department. The finance department goes, they have no investment. They're not artists. They're fucking finance. Okay, No shade to finance people who work in finance who might be listening, but like, you got to admit you're not an artist. That's not what you do, and it's not what you're good at. I think maybe you have a hobby or something, but who knows. The people in finance don't understand. There's probably some that do, but a lot of them, I'm assuming, don't really have a concept of. They're like the executives. They don't know what exactly makes the game good. Their job is to type up a little thing of changes that need to be made, to figure out, to give it to the executives to say, here's how our product can make the most money. That's how you go from a flat $60 release to now it's as a subscription to now you can also, in addition to a subscription, you can also pay extra money for this other thing. And it just keeps going and going and going, because the finance people are trying to figure out how much money you can get out of a single game. Money is maybe not like the best term. It's more like a revenue source. And this is like a very common thing. Like, this is not a super complex idea. That the more sources of revenue you have, the more potential revenue you could make. Like, if I wanted to monetize this podcast, I could be making money on this podcast and my main channel, which have well, honestly, again, I really don't know what the audience crossover is between them, but like, it's different types of content. Let's say my main channel completely fucking dies. This channel is relatively independent from it in terms of like, it's a totally different kind of content, besides the fact that like, it has me on it. Maybe if I like got super canceled for something and you wouldn't even want to listen to the sound of my voice, then both of them would die. But hey, that would actually probably just be my whole career would die. If let's say my channel gets locked, it gets shut down tomorrow because if YouTube decides to blow me off the face of the earth. This channel, the podcast, is pretty much like would be a separate revenue stream that probably wouldn't be affected too much, to be honest. So like, yeah, and everyone knows about this. Having a diverse stream of revenues is good because you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. If you're, it's just like a smart thing. Like, let's say you work a physical job. Okay, what if you get an injury? What if the injury is permanent? You can't do the job anymore. That's why people do these little side things like investing or, investing's a very common one. Or they have a secondary job that maybe, is a little more insulated in case the other one goes down, right? Like it's very common. Maximize, so the finance people's job is to maximize revenue. Because a $60 game, that's a one-time purchase. You're going to get $60 one time. What if we had a separate source of revenue that could be potentially recursive, and indefinite? So theoretically, if you're a pencil pusher, these extra revenue sources are a net positive. You can give it to your boss and they'll say, wow, this has so much opportunity to make money. And then when they're actually implemented, they harm the product so deeply that the product doesn't even sell in the first place. This is why people make exceptions to things like when they say, oh, it's only cosmetic, right? That's generally the line. Like, people have a line. Cosmetic only, like microtransactions, tends to be the line for most people. And the reason for that is that it doesn't hurt the experience enough to make you just not want to play it. If when it starts affecting gameplay, like you buy a $60 game and then, you are gated by some kind of super arbitrary lock, but you can pay more to accelerate, or you buy your $60 FIFA game and then you have to play a fucking gacha game to get the players that you want, which fuck EA literally got sued over. Those types of things make that FIFA's a bad example because FIFA still sells every year, although it can't be called FIFA anymore. I remember that. But like, I mean, that's a separate reason. FIFA sells because it's FIFA, because it's, oh my god, it's soccer, and sports games are super normie friendly. There's maybe a kinder way to say that, but like, you know what I mean. There's a guy who like, he plays like a couple games a year and he always buys the new FIFA. It's just like a thing. It's just a thing. You and me, the real hardcore gamers who are playing tons of stuff and different genres and things, that's not, we're a little more curated in what we play, or what we give our money to, or not. Right, so like, yeah, so Square's profits are down, and you know what, they deserve it, fuck them. But you know what, the other thing, let's talk about the capitalism fail. There's a lot of cases like this where the company starts going down, and you know what happens? All the executives just give themselves more money because they just can, and they lay people off. And trickle down economics was a really good idea, Reagan. Until you account, it's so. You know what's really funny? To get political, the types of people who I feel like are really into the idea of trickle-down economics are the exact same people who are like, yeah, communism's great until you factor in human greed. And it's like, you like trickle-down economics? That's the same fucking thing. It entirely relies on the people at the top just being saints and like, I'm just going to distribute my money evenly. No, I can go without an extra $300,000 bonus. God. Okay. I'm going to go into my rant about the Final Fantasy Dissidia Final Fantasy NT. It's always weird how they put Final Fantasy after Dissidia. Okay, if you guys don't know, because I wrote this down, and I'm going to get to this, goddammit, before I finish this podcast. Okay. So, Dissidia Final Fantasy was, at first, a series of 2 fighting games that came out on the PSP in, like, the 2000s, I think. And they are essentially the Final Fantasy fighting games. They are 3D arena fighters with Final Fantasy characters, and they're fucking great. They are really good. I think so, at least. I love them. I mainly played Duodecim. I never really played the original. Okay. You want to talk about sequels that completely invalidate the originals? Okay, so Dissidia 1 comes out, and it's pretty well received. Sequel, Duodecim, comes out, Dissidia Duodecim, and it's basically the first game, except it's just better. As in, like, system and system and balance changes, more characters, more content, stuff like that. And when I say it's literally the first game, I mean it very literally. I'm saying literally, because it actually just has the first game's entire story mode, and then a bonus story mode for Duodecim, which essentially there's a new story mode for some of the new characters they added in Duodecim. That's like a prequel to it. So there is no reason to play the original Dissidia. You just played Duodecim because the systems are a lot better. There's like a lot of little minor improvements. There's new systems, there's new modes, there's more characters, there's more moves, there's a bunch more items and stuff like that, and it has the original story plus a new one. So just play it. Just play that one instead. Okay. I just want to gush about Duodecim first. Duodecim is really, really fun. Essentially, the entire Dissidia series was actually inspired by Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, which, if you've ever seen that movie, is mainly just valuable for the epic fight scenes, the super badass anime CG cutscene fight scenes in that movie. Of like Cloud versus Sephiroth. I think it was literally like someone at Square, some like director or producer, saw Advent Children and he saw the fight scene with Cloud versus Sephiroth. If you haven't seen the movie, but you have seen Sephiroth's trailer for Smash Ultimate, that scene of him and Cloud fighting near the end is almost directly like shot for shot, like it's a partial recreation of their fight scene. It's really sick. He saw that scene and he was like, we should make a game that's like this. So Dissidia is kind of like anime combat simulator. I think it honestly does a better job at emulating a super cool anime fight scene than most actual anime arena fighters do. So when I say that, I mean, okay, so it's a 3D arena fighter, right? But there's a bunch of different stages, and every single one has super different layouts and like geography and unique elements to it. So there'll be like unique mechanics, like what is it? One of the smallest stages I remember is Pandemonium. It's based off Final Fantasy II, like the final dungeon, and I think it's like it's split up into like these two. It's a very small, like enclosed arena, and it's split into these kind of two halves. And one of the halves gets like, they alternate, they have like a little bridge between them, but they alternate between which one has like spikes on it or something like it. So there'll be a little like flashing warning that it's going to transition. And then you have to like go between, both players have to like go between the two halves of the stage. So you get fun stuff like that. Every single wall in the game you can run on. It's literally, like you go up to, once you're near a wall, you get a little like arrow indicator, and if you press triangle, your character will just like magnet feet start running up the wall, and you can just like run around. There's no limit to it. You can just run up the wall on any surface. Like you can run up pillars, cliffs, anything. You can run on the sides of platforms, and then you can like jump off. There's like air dodges. There's directional air dodges. There's 360 degree air dashing, which you can. It has this whole. The game has this whole system. Oh, fuck, I'll get to that in a second. There's rails that you can like grind, like a Sonic game, which is the same interaction of like you just press triangle when you're near one, and you'll start grinding up it, and like while you're on the rail, you can jump off, and then you get like an air dodge in the air, and you can do all this fucking sick. You can like air dash towards your opponent. There's like the ground movement is cool. Like there's still like similar kind of like systems of like rolls and dashing. It's fucking so sick. And it has all this customization where you essentially have a load. Every character like levels up. There's this whole progression system, an RPG progression system like we talked about earlier. Every character levels up the more you play with them. And leveling them up, well, you get a couple things. Number one is you get access to new moves. So every character has 3 moves on the ground and 3 moves in the air. Sorry, no, wait. Technically 6 moves on the ground, 6 moves in the air. Because you have what are basically light and heavy attacks. I'll get into that later too. And as you level up, you get this thing. I hate that they called it CP. It's like character points, but I hate it when games call it CP because it's like, but it's called CP. And essentially, you have a bunch of different like optional bonuses that you can add to your character, like a 360 degree air dash, or an infinite air dash, or an extra air action. Oh, and there's like double jumps and stuff like that. And then a bunch of like systems, like you can customize it, like how your character interacts with the system. There's also there's like summon crystals. So like all this way that they integrated the summons from the Final Fantasy series is that you can basically like equip a summon to yourself, and each one has a different effect that will trigger. It has like a certain trigger that'll happen during the battle. Like if your health falls below a certain percent, your summon will trigger and it will have a certain effect. Like it maxes your bravery. I'll talk about the fucking bravery HP system now. So essentially, the game's light attacks are called. It has this really interesting health system where you have this number which is called bravery, and you have like a base level of bravery, and it goes up when you hit your opponent with bravery attacks. You basically like leech bravery from them. So like they lose it when if a bravery attacks raise your bravery and they lower your opponent's. And when it hits 0, you get a brave break, which means that not only do you hit 0, and then so basically it's like the person who breaks the opponent gets a big. It's called like the stage bravery bonus. So they get a big bonus to their bravery, and then the opponent, it has to like. Their bravery can't suffer any more damage until it gets back up to the base level. And then the way you use your bravery is with HP attacks, which are kind of like the heavies. So HP attacks spend your bravery to deal damage to your opponent's actual health points. So the game is basically about like building up your bravery using these kind of lighter bravery attacks, doing dodging and dashing in and out of specific ranges, and then building it up and then catching them off guard or whiff punishing something and hitting them with an HP attack. The game is very, very neutral heavy. What I mean by that is there's basically no combos. Like, moves will hit multiple times, and sometimes there's ways that you can set up where you can get string multiple moves together, but it's not super common. And it's kind of a character specific, there's a lot of mechanics. There's like assists in the game that you can call in. Once you have you fill up an assist bar, you can call an assist in, and you can get combos off of like assist attacks essentially. So like it's very like character and like assist focused, whether or not you can actually string multiple moves together. The game is basically balanced. It's designed around a lot of like individual attacks. And it's very weighty feeling. So moves have a lot of recovery time after you throw them out. Like if you whiff an attack, it's like, fuck, you're hanging there for a second. Less so with bravery attacks, but you can still have that. You side note, you can like also like unlock new moves, and you can actually like switch out. You get 3 slots for the air and 3 slots for the ground, and you can switch out which moves your character is using. And you can assign them to like different inputs and stuff. It's really nice. So the game is like actually super tense because it revolves. Am I going to compare it to Samurai Showdown? I think I just might, because it's not too far off, if I'm being honest. It's super whiff punish heavy, and it's really focused around like playing footsies with your opponent, and like throwing something out and like trying to bait them into a certain range, and then like trying to like as quickly as you can like dash. Like you can kind of like dodge cancel at a certain point in the move's recovery, and like get out of the dodge out of the way and then punish them when they try to punish you. And it's really cool. Some people will say that like the combat feels kind of floaty. It sort of does, but once you get used to it, it's so cool. Because again, you're doing all of this not just in like a grounded sense, but you're doing this like in the air and like running off of walls and jumping off of them and grinding on rails. And the stages are really cool because there's a ton of variety to them. There's stages that have a ton of verticality. There's ones that are big and open. There's ones that are more flat. They have like unique little stage hazards sometimes. There's like bottomless pits and things like that. There's fucking destructible parts of the environment all around. You can play one of the stages, one of the most cramped stages, is the Phantom Train from Final Fantasy VI. You get to play in the Phantom Train in one of the cars, and like all the seats are destructible, and you can just blow through, smash someone and blow them through all the seats. It's really cool. It is like anime combat simulator. The game's badass. It's really fun. And ultimately, I think the reason it wasn't more popular is that it was just on the PSP, which didn't even... PSP was, I think, sold pretty well. But, like, the fact that it didn't get any other releases beyond that is a real shame, because it's great, and it has like a lot of content. Duodecim has a ton of content. It's not just the story modes, but like there's all of these optional lore entries that you can unlock. The story mode is actually like a fairly fleshed out, like you can run around in a little environment and go essentially encounter these sort of NPCs who are like copies of Final Fantasy villains. They're like clones. You're essentially fighting clones the whole game, but like, yeah, no, it's good. Every single character has a little arc. There's tons of references. Obviously, it uses like all the music. There's a really cool dungeon mode where you like you start out with like one character, and then you go through like these rooms of a dungeon just on like a map. And every room, there's like a bunch of different layouts to the dungeons. Like they can have different... You can find items which you can equip to your character, because there's this whole item equipping thing, which might honestly be a little too much, but like, the game has a ton of content, and it's really fun. So a couple years go by, and a new Dissidia game gets announced, Dissidia NT. And it's not going to be like the previous games. So for number one, it's not getting a handheld release because the PSP wasn't around, and Vita was pretty much on its way out around, excuse me, like 2016, 2017 when it came out. So it's going to start off with an arcade release. Okay, that's different. In Japan. And then it's going to get a console release. Okay, so if you're fucking cool, you're going to get fucking a console, like modern, like PS4 graphics, modern graphics with the Dissidia characters. Because one of the coolest things about the game, as like a Final Fantasy fan, is that all of the character designs are based off of like the original concept artwork. Namely from like Yoshitaka Amano. So like the Final Fantasy 1 representative is the Warrior of Light, who's that, like, if you look at the Japanese cover of FF1, that's the character. Like, that's who he is, and they couldn't depict that because it's too complex of a design in, like, 8 bits, but, like, all of those designs you get to see in 3D in Dissidia, and it's like, oh, man, fuck, just, like, a full game in the Amano style would be so good. So cool. But just at least getting to see them in 3D and like fighting it's a fine compromise. When I say it's not like the other games, it wasn't just that it was going to get a console release and that it was going to be, all new and shiny. Because Square, if we're going to talk about how Square puts all these shitty live service games out, Square was like, I'm assuming this is how it went. Square, some executives said, hey, esports are big. What do we got? And because Square like doesn't make any like competitive games really, they were like, we do have this one. We made like a fighting game like 7 years ago. Yeah. That's going to be our new esport. Well, what's so wrong with that? You might ask. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's a competitive game, whatever. It wasn't just going to be an esport. It was going to be like the ones that they saw were successful. As in, it was going to be a team game. Not team as in like a Marvel vs. Capcom kind of way, or even a KOF kind of way. it was going to be 3 players versus 3 players. Yeah. So there's this interesting thing that happens when you change the, what would you even call that? The format of a game so drastically, which is that you have to design the game completely differently. Here's an example. When Arxis was developing Strive, they settled on the fact that they wanted wall breaks in the game. They probably made that decision very early on. And they said, okay, if we're going to commit to this idea of wall breaks, there's characters that we want in the game who just straight up do not make any sense. So like Ramlethal, completely different. Sort of. Her moveset's completely redesigned from Exert to Strive, because in Exert, her whole thing was, oh, she has this kind of finicky, rascally, weaselly kind of neutral, and then she gets a hit, and then she converts that into a full juggle into the corner, and then she sets up the swords, and then she mixes your ass to hell and back, and she just stomps you in the corner. That literally doesn't work in Strive. If they ported over that exact kind of moveset, Ramlethal would be fucking awful. She'd be terrible. Because she would have weird, finicky, rascally, not great neutral, and then she would get a hit, and then carry you to the corner. Oh, okay, cool. And then she would do what she wants, which is to open you up in the corner, and then she would just break the wall, and she'd be back to square one. Getting her win condition would literally punish her. So they had to totally remake her. So they kind of like... She has a similar kind of win condition, but she does it in a totally different way. Where instead now, she is really arguably way too good neutral. One of the most just fucking like, I hit the button. Far slash. And then she gets you to the corner, and then she still has an interaction with the wall where like, okay, she can throw her swords, the swords land in the wall, and then they explode after a delay. So she still has the idea of like, oh, she's setting up the swords, and then if you're in the corner, you can't just ignore the swords, because, you know, in Exert, it's like, oh, there's a delay, and then the swords come down, but in Strive, it's like, they explode. So same sort of kind of pressure, and then she hits you with just a big old damage combo. So like, that big old damage combo that she gets when she hits you in the wall is like the replacement for the repeated looping combos that she would get, or the, you know, that she would like be resetting you with in Exert. That was how they dealt with that design problem. Let's look at NT compared to Duodecim. Namely, my favorite character from Duodecim, Golbez, the Final Fantasy IV villain representative. So like, oh yeah, so the roster is entirely like a hero, and the main hero and the main villain from like every Final Fantasy game. So that's the core roster, and then Duodecim added a lot of like other characters like Tifa, Laguna, Lightning. But beside that, oh, Yuna was in Duodecim. So basically, Golbez, his playstyle is so cool. Essentially, Golbez, the concept behind every single one of Golbez's attacks is that they have a close range and a long range element to them. So you aren't choosing between close or long range. It'll be something like he has a move where he makes like a pillar of like magical light energy shoot up, like a big geyser of energy shoot up at a far distance away from him. And then while he does that move, he does this kind of like swipe while he's casting it. It's that kind of, and that's your close range element. A lot of them kind of work like that. It'll be something like he swipes up close and causes some kind of magic to happen further away. So his strong, and if he lands certain moves, specifically like his longer range moves, he can tend to directly, he could go into one of the most busted things in the game, bravery to HP attacks, which he has this, it's called like Galactic Storm or something like that, which is just like if you hit a bravery to HP attack is the most literal thing. It's exactly what it sounds like. If you land the bravery attack, you can hit the square button, which is the HP attack button, and it'll just instantly, like automatically combo transition into an HP attack. So he can do that off of like 4 of his moves that are really good. So you just kind of like, that's your kind of goal, is you're just going to like hit them a bunch of times from long range. And then at close range, you can actually tend to usually kind of push them outwards again with your little swipey swipe. So yeah, that's the premise behind a lot of Golbez's moves. He has a close range and a long range variant where he's strong. But he has a noticeable gap, which is everything in between. Because there's a decent distance between like directly in front of him and like, 40 feet away, where the long range part will happen. So basically, it's not like that far. It's not like 40 feet away. It's not that long range, but it'll be like a decent ways in front of him. So essentially, Golbez, the way you play Golbez is that he has this game. He has this kind of dance where he's trying to keep the opponent in one of his strong ranges, long or close. And the opponent is trying to get into the middle range. And there's this whole, like, it's like a dance, because the opponent is trying to, they'll step into, like, a round where he can hit them with a, like the long range part of the move, and then they'll go back in to try and bait him out into throwing it, and then they're going to punish the recovery. And it's really fun. It's a really fun play style. Like managing all these different spacings and stuff like that. Now in a 3v3 setting, that doesn't work. Because this whole back and forth dance between both players completely falls apart if some fucking guy can just zoom in from off screen and just start slapping into you. It adds such a level of chaos that it becomes like really interesting things from the gameplay are not possible. It veers into like party game tier kind of thing. So Golbez's old moveset and his old design don't work. So what did they do? Well, he had to be completely remade from the ground up. And they made, so now, instead of like this cool, like close range, long range kind of play, which is not a thing you see in a lot of games in general, now he has a move where he throws a wind magic orb, and he has this other move where he throws a water magic orb, and he has this other move where he throws a rock, like a earth magic orb, and he hits you with the orbs, and they don't really combo in any interesting way. He has projectiles and he throws them, and then don't leave, because we're not done. He has something else. Okay, he's got something else. Okay, every character in NT got like a unique skill. What's Golbez's skill? Like they called them like EX skills or something. What's Golbez's? He gets a little dragon that he can summon, and it doesn't like do anything. It's like a visual like power up that he can do. And then when he has the dragon power up on, he gets his moves do a little more damage. And he can summon like 2 meteors instead of 1 meteor for his HP attack. Woo, that's really something there. That's okay then. All right. So basically there's this, if you look at characters, like how they reworked them from Duodecim to NT, A lot of them remained relatively similar, but there was a lot of casualties as well. And when you look at the casualties in general, they basically traded out this incredible, like this interesting, very like deep moveset with like, there's maybe not a ton of things in it, but the way that it's applied gives a lot of, makes a lot of, for a lot of interest. It's doing more with a little, right? It's these, you only have so many of these like things going on in a character, but the way that they use creates interesting, a variety of interesting situations. And they took that depth and they basically replaced it, because it wasn't possible to keep it, they replaced it with complexity. They just replaced it with a new mechanic. There's one like decent example of this, and it's honestly one of the few characters I think was notably improved in the transition to NT, which is Bart's. So Bart's okay, so there's this problem, because in Duodecim, one of the cool things is that every character's moveset tends to reflect something about their game. So like some kind of unique mechanic or something. So like Lightning has the paradigm shift, where she has basically 3 different stances that she can go into, just like the combat system in Final Fantasy 13. What the heck? There's a character, what was her name? Prisha? Something like that? Who is like a monk from Final Fantasy XI, and her moves all combo together like Final Fantasy XI character, like monk characters. I mean, not everyone has like a super different mechanic, so I'm just trying to think. Cecil has like, is also a stance character. He can switch between Paladin and Dark Knight mode, so that's cool. Bart's and Vaughn, or however, I can see where the team struggled, because both of their games have a heavy emphasis on the job system. So if you were going to make a fighting game moveset for one of them, you're like, oh, obviously you would use the job system. So like every different type of attack that they have is them switching to a different job. That's cool. But both games have that, so like there'd be overlap. So Vaughn gets the job system based moveset, where like, oh, he actually changes. He has like, you know, in the air he can pull out like, he gets, I forget what the jobs are called in 12, and he'll pull out like a gun, or like he can pull out a bow for the archery thing, and or like on the ground he gets these different, he can cast magic, and then he can do all these different types of jobs. Bart's, they were like, oh, well, what was in 5? What did it have unique? The mimic job? So Bart's in Duodecim is a copycat character. Not for like the opponent he's fighting, it's just his moves literally just reuse other characters' attacks. Like, he pulls out the Cloud's Buster Sword, and then he can pull out, and he doesn't attack with that, or he pulls out Squall's Gunblade. He does a thing with that. He uses, like, a spell that Terra uses. And it's like, okay, not super interesting. In NT, they basically took his moves, they totally changed both characters. So Bart's is now the job switch character. Vaughn was changed to being like mainly focused around like HP attacks. But Bart's was basically switched to have a really actually cool system for being as complex as it was, where every single attack he had was based off of a job from Final Fantasy V. But there was this level up system where there was like a hidden point value, not terribly dissimilar to like Susanoo from BlazBlue. I don't know if that's a super great analogy, but essentially all of his moves have like different, they start at like the basic level, and then you can level them up to the advanced version of the job. There's only like 2 tiers for each one. And you do that by basically using the move, and then you get like more points towards the level up. It's like if you get like 15 points, then you level up, and you get like 2 for using the move and like 4 for landing, like hitting with the move or something like that. And then you would level it up and it would get way stronger. And he was actually really fun. He was a very fun character to play. He was one of the few exceptions. Like when I was so disappointed with NT. And part of that was like, oh my god, they fucking totally made Golbez so boring. Bartz was actually the character that I started playing because I thought he was way more fun, just straight up. There's a lot of like, okay. Basically, my big problem with NT is that a lot of the interesting, cool neutral was ripped out. In terms of the characters, it was like their tool sets got changed around to be much less interesting and just adding more mechanics. They have everyone has some kind of power-up skill or something like that just is not very interesting when everyone gets something like that. Fucking Ace, who's in there from Final Fantasy Type 0, he's like, he throws cards. Oh, that's cool. But he has this incredibly complicated system of like which cards he throws that like give him different bonuses. And it's like, it was a lot. And so in the terms of characters, like their gameplay just kind of got made more complex, but not as interesting or deep. The rest of the game was like, all of the stages had to be made way larger to accommodate 6 players. Like, fuck. All the stages are way larger, and there's no way to get, like, infinite air dash. All the customization has been ripped out. Everyone has, like, you can't even switch out, like, what moves have certain, like, bindings. Or like certain, which inputs certain moves are on, which you could in the previous games. There's no, like, customizing them with, like, specific perks. There's no equipping like gear, like equipment, which I'm actually kind of fine with because it was a little much. There's like something like several hundred pieces of gear in Duodecim, and it's just a lot. But like all that stuff is gone. There was no dungeon mode. A lot of the cool parts of the game were just not there. And so like the actual experience of playing the game was like, oh, there's a fucking guy way over there. Time to air dash. Oh, my air dash is running out. It ran out. Okay, now I just gotta run. Oh, it's back up again. I'm gonna air dash. And like, it's so... That was what I was feeling so much of the time playing it. And they're just... Sometimes it could be fun, because Dissidia is fun, and there's parts of it left in the game, but the deeper parts that was like really made me want to put like several hundred hours into Duodecim just were not there for NT. It was just so simple and like boring. And there's people who are just like staunch defenders of the game, and they say, the team aspect. Here's the problem. Okay, so here's how winning and losing works in NT. In the previous games, it was just, someone's HP gets to 0. In NT, you have stocks, okay? So you get knocked out. You have 3 stocks. And anyone getting knocked out, you come back, you just have to like revive after a few seconds. But any time someone gets knocked out, that's a stock gone. And you have 3. So now I've gone on rants before on this podcast about why making games more team dependent or team reliant is a terrible decision for most players, for like the majority of your player base. Yeah, NT is like a textbook example. Because like, I'm over here fighting this guy. We're having a little duel. I'm not doing anything wrong. And then I lose the game. We lose the game instantly because, the 2 guys like on the other side of the map got like fucking bum rushed and then just died, and then one of them respawned and died again. And fucking, I didn't contribute at all to the loss, and it's it's so bad. Oh, it's so bad. That was infuriating. Which leads me to the online, because there was no okay. Oh no, do I gotta talk about the single player content? So the single player content was just a story mode. You're like, oh, okay, story mode. Yeah. The story mode is dumb. It's really dumb. I'm not talking about the story itself. I'm sure it is dumb, because it's Dissidia. Dissidia is kind of dumb. I mean, parts of the story were cool, but the way that NT's story works is that you can't just play the story. It's essentially divided. You go to the story mode, and it's divided into nodes on not quite a grid, but like there's a starting point, and then there's a couple branches off from that, and it's all moving in one direction, and there's a couple like branching paths, but it all ends up kind of going back to the end of the game, at the end of the story. You're like, okay, what's wrong with that? The nodes have to be unlocked. So I even remember what it was called. There was a currency, basically, that you would get by playing matches, I think online, or versus the CPU. It was called Memoria. And then you could spend so many Memoria to unlock a node on the story mode map. And then you could play it. And some of them were just cutscenes. Some of them were battles. Some of them were cutscenes. Why the fuck would you do it? It's just padding. It's pure padding to just not let you play. I would have to go in, because I never finished it. I got like... My experience with it was that I got like a couple nodes in, and then I was like, oh, I'm out of Memoria. You know what? Instead of like going back and forth, because that's such a choppy experience, let me just grind up. I just counted up like how much Memoria I needed for the whole thing. Let me just grind that out. Let me just grind it out. And then I'll go back and I'll play the whole story mode in one shot. And that fucking... And then I tried to play the game online, and I fucking stopped playing it because, like 2 weeks into the game being out, I was already having like 5-minute wait times for matches, and then I would get a match, and both of my teammates would be bots because they couldn't find another person to play the game. They couldn't find enough people online. I'm talking like in the afternoon on a Friday. Nope. No one playing. And when you were in the game, it's delay-based netcode with 6 people. Delay-based netcode can start falling apart with a 1v1 with just 2 players. 6 people? It was so bad. It was so bad. It was fucking like laggy, froze all the time, disconnections, input delay. Holy crap. Just a disaster. And guess what? The game sold like shit outside of Japan. It might have sold fine in Japan or done fine in arcades, but yeah, guess what? Didn't do that great. And you know what? They deserved it. And it sucks because, like, it had like Noctis in it. It had a lot of cool characters. It had a fucking Ramza from Final Fantasy Tactics. That Square does not give that game nearly enough love. You know, it had some really cool picks from it. And like, the biggest problem with this game was the focus, in my opinion, the shift to the 3v3 and the arcade, like this esports angle that they tried to pull with it. Because you're like, why did they do this? Because it's like the root of all these problems the game has. It's just like a structural issue with the game. You're like, why did they do this? And there's an interview with like the producer or something, and he goes, oh, the reason we did this, we switched from 1v1 to a 3v3, is because, in his words, and obviously it's because they wanted to have a team esport, but in his words, the reasoning was, Final Fantasy has always been about creating a party of adventurers and going out and doing the, your thing. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, that was the dungeon mode. That was just the dungeon mode in Duodecim. That's just what that was. Is you could collect multiple party members and pick which ones you wanted to. And if you want to make the angle of like, oh, but it would be, you could make that even more part of the game by having multiple characters, right, on one side. To which I would say, there's a huge missed opportunity here, and that is to make this a tag team game. I am like envisioning, like, imagine 3D Marvel. Imagine like a 3D arena fighter anime combat simulator, Marvel versus Capcom style game. Or, like a versus type game. And I start where you have like one or maybe two assists, and you can like tag them in and like do a bunch of combos. And you do it with Final Fantasy characters, and you have all this crazy movement options and customization, and I'm just thinking about it, and I'm like, fuck. Or maybe tone it down a little bit with like something like maybe like a Tekken tag, where it's just two characters, and there aren't like assist call-in attacks or that kind of thing. You can do a thing where there's some game, it's like an anime game or something, where you have like two characters that you can tag between, and then like one assist character. You could do that, like one dedicated assist character, and then another character who can like come in to do like they have a tag in attack or something like that. There's so many cool things you could do, and if you just okay, so like there's like two main kind of like, there are improvements. So like Duodecim is not a perfect game by any means. There are a couple things gameplay-wise that could be tweaked. For instance, there are two kind of system mechanics that you can sort of build your character to be strong in. One is the assist thing, which is like a gauge that I mentioned. You gotta fill up and call it an assist. And the other is EX. It's called like EX mode, which is as you're fighting, these little like blue crystals will like spill out, and you'll absorb them into your character, and you'll fill up an EX bar. And occasionally during the match, there'll be points where an EX crystal will spawn, and you can go get it. It'll give you a big bonus. Once you have a maxed out EX gauge, you can go into EX mode, which I don't think it really provides any like stat increases, but it gives you access. It's a limited time mode where you get access to it's a little bit like instant kill from Guilty Gear, to not quite an instant kill, but an EX finisher. So an EX finisher is basically, the EX finisher is when it kills. It's just like an EX attack. Basically, if you hit the opponent with an HP attack while you're in EX mode, you will basically go into, you can hit a button to confirm that you're going to start the EX sequence, and essentially you'll be teleported into like a void super dimension. And every single character has a unique little like mini game that they have to play. So it can be something as simple as like mash the button really fast, or it could be like Tifa has like a slot machine that you have to play, or some kind of like line the thing up and then hit the X button, and then you do a big ol' attack. You do a big ol' super big move. It's like a super move, and everyone has a unique EX sequence essentially. Sometimes it's like a rhythm game or something like that. It's really cool, and it's like a cool way to, like, every character has a totally different thing, and it's like a big attack and a big sequence of animation, and it only really happens like once a match, maybe. It doesn't happen every match at all, because you have to land the HP attack first of all, and you're in EX mode, which like tells your opponent that's what you're fishing for. But like, it's really cool. And there's even like a character, Gabranth, I think, from 12, and he's entirely based around EX mode. So I think like his subtitle is called the Executioner, like in the game. Like his title, he's called the Executioner, because he has like 2 bravery attacks. He's got like 1 in the air and 1 on the ground. That's it. He has like no bravery attacks. But his HP attack is not a real attack. It's to charge his EX meter. So he's based around like swatting the opponent away and then just charging up. And then once he's has his full bar, he can go into EX mode. And when he's in EX mode, he gets access to his EX attack. He goes into this whole sequence where he has like a selection of like a dozen different EX moves that you can pick from. And it's like really cool. Like this whole character based around this one little system mechanic. EX is a little stronger than assists, except for like a couple characters who can like rely. The main problem is that there's only like a couple good assist characters. You can set any character in the game to be your assist, but only a couple of them are good. Most of them don't really do a whole lot. EX tends to be much more reliable unless you're going for like a specific kind of like combo oriented build. It's like, I remember Kuja was actually really good for that. So you could like totally do a thing where like, okay, new Dissidia, it's gonna have current gen console tier high end graphics. It's gonna look really good. Same 1v1 gameplay, all this customization thing. Maybe tone down how many like items there are, because holy fuck. Rebalance the systems so that they're a little more in line with each other. So that you can still like build towards like, because when I say build, I mean like equipment. Yeah, mainly like equipment, and then certain perks that you can take will like, oh, you build more assist or you build more EX. Like which kind of what you're kind of focusing on. You still get that customization option, but you are you're gonna like, it's rebalanced, so it's a little better. Maybe it's a little more streamlined, and it's less like you gotta like grind a bunch of character levels or something like that. There's a lot of things. There's so many directions you could have taken those first 2 games. So many directions you could have taken a third game that would have been really rockin'. Just really cool. And they wanted the esports money, so they fucking completely fucked it up. And oh my fucking god, I get upset whenever I think about it, because I don't know if we're ever gonna see another one. There is like a random like gacha game called Dissidia Opera Omnia. Not at all a fighting game. It's literally like a gacha game RPG. It's neat that it has like a bunch of characters, but yeah, I don't know. It's a gacha game, so it's really not what I'm looking for. I want a fucking sick ass Final Fantasy anime combat simulator with modern graphics and even more shit and cool systems and stuff. That's what I want. Because the core gameplay is already so fun, you just keep it. And now, unfortunately, because Square's a bunch of idiots, I don't know if we'll ever see one again. I hope it's a situation where it's like Ghostbusters, and it's like, yeah, we made like a shitty one. We just gotta wait like 5 years to get another crack at it. I hope it's like that. I can only hope. And with that, I didn't know what the hell I was going to talk about on this episode of the podcast, but I have indeed filled up 2 hours of time. I'm hungry. So if you've been listening this far, thank you so much for listening to me ramble. If you have a question, leave it down in the comments below, but please phrase it in the form of a question, because I am not just going to read your thoughts out loud. Gonna start up work on videos. I've just kind of taken the week off, and that's it. I have a Patreon. Goodbye.